In the valley of Eldermere, life was simple. The villagers woke with the sun, worked through the day, and rested when the stars filled the sky. But above them, the Silver Crest Mountain stood tall, covered in thick snow and endless mist. No one had ever reached the top. The few who tried always returned, tired and broken, whispering of the cold, the sharp winds, and the way the mountains seemed to fight back. Edric grew up in Eldermere, working as a stonemason. He spent his days shaping stone, carving it carefully until it fit just right. His father had been the same, but one day he left to climb the mountain and never came back. People told Edric to forget about it, to live his life in the valley like everyone else. But he couldn't. The mountain called to him, not because he wanted to be the first to climb it, not for glory, but for something deeper. He wanted to understand, he wanted to see what his father had seen. So, on the first cold morning of winter, Edric packed his things and set out. At first, the path was easy, the ground was firm, the air was crisp, and the climb felt steady. But as the hours passed, the ground turned rough. The rocks were sharp, the cold bit at his skin, and the wind howled in his ears. He pushed forward, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. When the cliffs came, he had to use his hands to climb. His fingers, used to holding a chisel, gripped the frozen stone, pulling himself higher, little by little. He slipped once, his foot scraping against the ice, but he caught himself. His breath was heavy, his arms burned, but he did not stop. Days passed. The higher he climbed, the harder it became. The air was thin, making it difficult to breathe. His legs felt like heavy stones, and his hands were stiff with cold. Then the storm came. The wind roared, carrying thick snow that stung his skin. He could barely see. His body screamed for rest, but the mountain gave him no shelter. He pressed himself against a rock, wrapping himself in his furs, shivering from cold and exhaustion. The thought of turning back whispered in his mind. Others had failed. Maybe he would too. Then he remembered his father's words, spoken long ago. "A stone doesn't break with one strike. It takes time. It takes patience." Edric took a deep breath. He would not give up. When the storm passed, he stood again. His legs shook, but he moved forward, step by step, higher and higher, pushing against the wind, against the pain. It would have been easy to stop, easy to say the mountain was too strong. But he did not come this far to turn back. The next part of the climb was even harder. The air was thin, every breath a struggle. The snow beneath his feet was soft and deep, making each step feel like dragging a heavy weight behind him. His body ached, his hunger gnawed at him, but he could not stop to eat. The cold had taken all feeling from his fingers and toes, but he kept going. He had made it too far to let the mountain defeat him. The night was long, and the darkness made every step feel heavier. He had no choice but to keep moving, even as exhaustion blurred the edges of his mind. The moon cast a silver glow on the snow, guiding him forward step by step. His breathing was slow and ragged, but his heart pushed him forward. Then at last, he reached the top. The world stretched out before him, endless and beautiful. The village was so small, the land stretched far beyond what he had ever imagined. The wind was still howling, but now it felt different. It felt like it had carried him there, like the mountain had tested him and he had answered. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle around him. For the first time, he felt no fear, no doubt, no burden of the past. He had climbed the mountain not to conquer it, but to understand himself. And he had. His body ached, his clothes were torn, his lips cracked from the biting wind, but none of it mattered. The climb had shaped him, just as he had shaped stone all his life, Every struggle, every slip, every moment of doubt had been part of the journey. He took a moment to sit, gazing out at the vast world before him. The sky was beginning to lighten, streaks of gold and pink appearing on the horizon. The journey down would be easier, but he was ready. He had faced the mountain, and in doing so, he had faced himself. As he prepared to descend, he realized the greatest lessons were not taught by the world below, but by the challenges he had faced alone. He had fought against the elements, against exhaustion, and against the doubts within his own mind. Yet he had stood firm. The mountain had not defeated him, it had transformed him. With a deep breath, Edric smiled. Then he turned to make his way back down, no longer the same man who had started the climb, but a man who now understood his own strength and the limitless power of perseverance. The moral of the story is that true strength is not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them step by step. Success is not just reaching the goal, but the journey of patience, determination, and belief in oneself. The greatest victories are not over the world, but over our own doubts and fears. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel for more motivational and self-improvement content.